Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner, and unfortunately, Harrison is still not back. We hope to have him back in the chair very, very soon. But in the meantime, we have another awesome guest host, my buddy Chris Lea. Chris, welcome to Try This at Home.
What's up? Thank you for having me. This is all new to me, and I'm excited to see how this goes.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, Chris is a sports anchor, journalist, podcaster, and last year we produced a movie together. So we work in this weird world of production together, and that is a big influence. Obviously, Mythbusters influenced me, but that's also a big influence here on the podcast. So I thought you were a perfect person to come on and talk about the show.
Absolutely. I think you're helping to introduce me to something that's new to me. It's not a new show, but new to me. Always heard of it. And so got a chance to finally watch my first episode, and I think I'm hooked right now.
That is very cool. We always like when folks have not actually watched Mythbusters before. My buddy Brockton McKinney was on a few weeks ago, and it was the same deal. It's a nice to get a fresh perspective. I will tee this episode up, and then I'm anxious to hear what you think about it. Our myths this week are cooling a six-pack, an ancient battery. Plus, we get a special bonus of meeting Buster 2.0. We'll get there in a little bit. It originally aired on December 29th, 2004. It was produced by a friend of the show, Andrew Farrell, and written by Mark Barlin. So, Chris, you came in an interesting time. I was actually, when I was watching this episode, I was like, man, there's so much. There's some legendary moments in this episode that will be interesting to walk through and see what stood out to you. But overall, what did you think? Your first ever Mythbusters episode, where are you at?
So for me personally, I think because, I'm into documentaries, as you know, I like watching things where I can learn and laugh. And, where I didn't find nothing was like extremely funny, but there was a few light moments in there that was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then also I just I learned just different things, like, things I just never even thought about before. And, I think I learned a way to cool some beer really quick. if I knew I'm going to have some friends coming over, something I've never even really, thought about before, but it's like, okay, I probably do need this trick in my back pocket, one day, whether at the beach or, I decide to invite you over or whatever ends up happening. So.
Did you have an idea in your head? Just obviously Mythbusters is one of those shows that is in the culture. You see it all over the place, even to this day. And obviously you've heard me and seen me and Harrison talking about it on the podcast before. But did you have an image in your head of what Mythbusters was going to be? How did that line up with actually seeing the show for the first time?
I didn't necessarily have an image. It kind of reminded me of the way that it's shot. Oh man, I can't think of the name of the show right now. But it came on along with Impractical Jokers. It was a guy who was doing basically magic tricks.
Was that like Nathan For You or one of those Nathan Fielder shows or whatever?
It wasn't Nathan Fielder. I'll do some Googles really quick and I'll figure it out and we'll get back to it. But it reminded me of those, I guess, the way that it was kind of presented. And I also kind of found myself thinking about now the production part of it, now, just thinking of all right, how much did this cost? What did it take to bring all this together? Clearly this episode was pretty much shot either in a day or within a couple of days of each other. The car apparatus probably took another day or whatever, but all the meat of the show probably was done really quickly. And so it had me thinking what's something that we could do?
I know.
So that's really where my mind started going. But I did think it was a cool premise for a show. And, so I'm excited to learn more about the show and watch some more.
Myth 1, cooling a six-pack. So the question here becomes the best way to cool a six-pack, but it starts with a specific myth, which is, can gasoline be used to cool a six-pack? So this is a story that I believe they said came from Vietnam, where soldiers would bury a six-pack of beer if they didn't have a cooler or freezer or something. Obviously, they're out in the field, and they would light a fire over it, and somehow that was supposed to cool it. What did you think of this story when it was introduced?
The show that I was thinking about before was the Carbonaro effect.
Ah, okay.
But when I heard this, at first I was like, that sounds pretty stupid. And then once they like went into the theories of why it could possibly work, of it, potentially, sucking the heat out of, the cans or whatever, I was like, I guess that could happen, but still there's fire there. And you think that it would heat the area around it. And so the fire's heat wouldn't like take the heat out of the cans. It'll probably make the cans a little more hot. But I was like, hey, it's science. I'm willing to learn something new. That maybe there's something I haven't considered. I was open-minded about it, but I didn't have any faith in that one.
Yeah, the way they describe it is that the idea is essentially supposed to be that when you light a fire, it draws heat up, right? It draws heat up out of what's burning or out of the surface. So if you did this in sand with gasoline, the sand's not burning, just the gas is burning, the flames are going to actually draw heat up, thereby creating a cool area around the six-pack and chilling it. That's the idea. I don't know a lot about thermodynamics. I think that defies some laws. Like, it just seems to me that there's no way that's possibly going to work. But I did love it as a ridiculous question and sort of way into all the testing they were going to do.
Here's something I thought about while they were doing this too, is that like at the beach, I'm sure that you've done this, everybody's done this, like you dig your feet into the sand a little bit. And when you do it, it does get a little bit cooler the further you go. And so I also kind of felt like, to do this effectively, can you actually do it in a fish tank? Like, would you need a bigger amount of land? Would you need to dig a little bit deeper? And then you're talking about extra work and all that type of stuff. But like, if it was going to work, right? Can you actually replicate this within a fish tank? So that was something I kind of considered if it did supposedly work for some people, but also just in general, just felt like, it just feels like a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about how much sand, like if having an entire beach versus a small fish tank, which is how they ultimately test it on the show, would make a difference. But that is an interesting. I think they mentioned at one point towards the end of the myth that it's like, obviously just pouring gas on sand is really bad. Yeah. So I think they didn't want to test it any larger than that, which is understandable.
Very much so understandable.
But that does bring in an interesting question. I thought it was interesting too. I've never thought about this, that there is an ideal beer temperature. That had just never occurred to me. So they actually went to see a bartender named Fritz, who I put in my notes is definitely not a horror movie villain. Every time they cut to him behind the bar, he's just like drinking beer and going like, yeah, this is great. I would drink it. It's like, who is this guy? It was great. But he says that 38 degrees is the ideal temperature. So for all their tests, that's what they're trying to get to, which is really cold. I mean, you're not far off from freezing there, which was kind of surprising to me. And as you said, they put the beer in a terrarium to actually test this idea. Set fire to it, and unsurprisingly, it gets warmer. Like right off the bat, they pretty much bust this whole idea. But this is where it pivots to something that I think is really cool, which is, okay, what is actually the best way to cool a beer? And for me, that's where this got really, really interesting. When they start getting into all the different types of like, does an ice bath work? Is it ice and salt? Is it just ice and salt and water? Like, what is going to be the best version of it? Had you heard of any of these before? Did you have any thoughts when they started going into that?
Yeah, one, I didn't know that there was like an ideal actual temperature, 38 degrees or whatever. So it just, for me, it's like, it's cold, cool. I'm gonna drink it.
Right.
This is where I started to learn some stuff here, because I think I would have initially just gone like straight ice.
Yeah.
And thought that would have been, the more effective way. But this was the part where it's like, okay, there's some interesting, pieces of science going on here. The part with, putting the salt in the, ice and the water. and the salt actually cooling it and making it the water be able to kind of stay a liquid at a colder temperature.
Yeah, it can get to sub freezing temperatures without freezing. It
Yeah.
just never occurred to me before that's why that I've done this. I've seen this. You make ice
Yeah.
cream, right? You always use salt in the ice mixture to help it cool faster. Never occurred to me that was why that works. It was
So
genius.
yeah, I've never made ice cream, so I just learned something right there too. I was just thinking, like, the thought process in my head when they were first doing all that was like, if you're getting ice and ice starts to turn to water, well, naturally it's not as cold anymore, so
Right.
it wouldn't necessarily like cool something down. But apparently, it is the best, the best environment for that, along with the salt. So that's where it's like, okay, that's something to really try. Get some Mortons out, get some salt, and do that if you have some friends coming over. I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, 5 minutes. They're able to cool the beer from
Yeah.
room temperature to 38 degrees in 5 minutes.
process.
Just using the saltwater bath, which is pretty crazy. Not as crazy as the fire extinguisher, which does it almost instantly. I think it's less than 3 minutes with a CO2 fire extinguisher to cool the beer. Maybe not the most practical
Yeah.
application, but if you're hanging around and you're not worried about a fire, but you are worried about having a nice cold beverage, maybe a good way to go. And from there, they go into this idea of what we see on the show a lot. This is kind of a staple of Mythbusters, which is the Adam and Jamie competition. That we're each going to build a rig and see if we can solve this problem better, more efficiently, who can do it. So I feel like we should kind of get into the methods that they used. Adam's up first, and he uses a super cooled coil, that's hard to say, to actually pour the beer through. And it's going to go through this coil, kind of like a cooling unit on an air conditioner, I guess, and come out colder on the other side. Doesn't end up working super well. It comes out at 46 degrees, so it cools it, but not a lot. But what do you think of Adam's method?
It was this part for me was new because I didn't realize that this was something that they do every episode. So thank you for letting me know. I was kind of wondering like what the point of it was here because it was like, well, you just did this here before, so now I get it. I thought that it was a little. There was a lot happening with that method. It didn't feel like that was something where you could pour it on one side and come out on the other side a little bit cooler. So I wasn't as impressed by that, but it was fun to look at. It was good visually.
And the reason this is the Adam and Jamie competition is something we've seen more and more on this season of the show as we get deeper into the show. And part of the fun of it is you get to see their personalities and the way that they think really like just on display in what they make. And so it's become this part of the storytelling of the show, which is really interesting, where you can see how their brains work. And with Adam, you have this over-engineered, complicated, but really cool looking rig. And then you get to Jamie, who is deadly efficient, purely just first thought, best thought. What is in front? What is the least, what's the least effort we can use to get to the result? His version,
through his mustache,
talking through the mustache all the time. His version is to use a liquid nitrogen cooled stick, basically wrapped in metal, dipped in liquid nitrogen, so it is super cooled, and you dip that into the beer to immediately chill it.
Yeah.
Again, pure Jamie Heineman like efficiency stuff. We see it so much on the show, and it's hilarious to see here because uncharacteristically for Jamie, it does not work. It not only does it not cool the beer enough, it only gets to 43 degrees, it freezes a good amount of the beer to the stick. So what you end up with is about a quarter of the beer you started out with, which I think kind of defeats the purpose. So it was an unusual take of neither Adam nor Jamie actually finding a good method here, which is interesting. Did you have any thoughts or ideas for something to try, or is there another thing we can come up with that would work?
I thought that when Jamie introduced his idea, I thought that was like that could be the one right there. It feels like that's a part of it. I probably need to do more experiments with my friends because I think, my efficient method would have just been let's put it in the fridge.
Right.
Just to see. But so I hadn't even thought about something outside of the box on what that could have been. But if I would have gone with anything, it felt like Jamie's method would have been the one. Maybe not that in particular, but you could probably figure out something else in that vein. Stick it, like literally take something that is cool to try to transfer it inside of the beer instead of pouring it through something or whatever. If you actually stick something that's cold within it, then hopefully like it becomes cold from there.
My wife has a method that she uses, and she used to work in bars and restaurants and stuff, and so I think this kind of comes from those days of cooling or wetting a paper towel and wrapping that like around the can and then sticking it in the freezer.
I've heard of this.
And she swears that works very, very efficiently. I haven't tested it to see, obviously compared to like 3 minutes, they're up against a fire extinguisher. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's one that that's one that I had heard of. I was thinking about along the lines of the fire extinguisher. I was trying to think of something that might be a little bit more practical. And I thought about, you ever have one of those like, canned air blowers like you use to blow out a keyboard or to blow out your phone, and if you turn it upside down and spray it, it gets super cold. I wondered if you poured the beer out or maybe just left it in the can, if you could use that like the fire extinguisher, but is more of a cheaper desktop alternative, for when you're drinking in the office. You just get out your
pop one open at work.
Get out your canned air and do it. That wasn't just the only thought that I had, because I love the fire extinguisher version, but I wondered if that might be a slightly more practical way to do it.
Here's a thought that I had, and of course, everything goes back to pro wrestling. This was around 2004, so we're not far removed from the time where folks were using fire extinguishers and beer in the ring. So it made me wonder if anybody had like got the idea from that, maybe like seeing Stone Cold or Sandman or whatever during some of these crazy hardcore matches. Like, I wonder if this would also cool the beer off. That's kind of where my mind went during that part of it.
I would have lost my mind if Stone Cold Steve Austin showed up on Mythbusters and was like, "Let me show you how to cool a beer."
Damn, son, I think you need to use the fire extinguisher.
He just stuns Adam and Jamie. There are fans of a certain age listening to this who are so happy right now.
Right.
Who were right there with us.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, the original myth here was specifically about the gasoline, and so they say that unsurprisingly is busted. But the other methods were fun. I thought this was a cool myth overall, and I love that it ends with the bartender just continuing to drink the beer through the rest of the scene while they're talking. He's just like, "Oh, this is free. I'm just going for it," and just the rest of the scene. I love that guy.
Burying a six-pack, pouring gasoline on it, and setting it on fire?
Yep, totally busted. It's a bad idea, it's dangerous, it pollutes, not the way to chill your beer.
Myth 2, Ancient Battery, also known as the Baghdad Battery. So this becomes a pretty legendary myth, and we'll get to why and something that happened in this episode in a minute. But the question here is, in the 1930s, there was an urn found in Baghdad, they believe was from sometime in the 200s, that was very odd. In the middle of the urn was a copper pipe wrapped around an iron rod. It had a plug, like a cork made of pitch, that was plugging the urn up, and the entire thing was full of acid. And they were trying to figure out, this is a real thing, you can look it up, this was a thing that was actually found around that time. But they were trying to figure out what it was used for, and one of the theories was that this was the first battery, which is pretty cool. I had never heard about this outside of Mythbusters, but like I said, if you go and look it up, you can find photos of the actual ones that were found, and people have done various tests over the years. But the question here is, can you make an ancient battery this way? Will it actually produce any electricity? And if it does, is it enough electricity to actually do something? Can we figure out what this was used for? Which I thought this was really cool. Like to your point earlier, it dips into the real facts, real science info part of the show, and they obviously take it, blow it up, make it big, make it fun. But what did you think about this one?
I thought it was cool, and this is where, like, for me, science kind of bridged the gap to some history. I feel like I like to know a little bit about everything if I possibly can, and so there are points in history that I read about where, before Ben Franklin went out there with the kite and the key, there were people who had harnessed electricity somehow or another. I remember reading a little bit about Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire, and that some of their streets had lampposts in there so that people could go out at night. And so I was thinking, how does that happen if supposedly there weren't, there wasn't, any electricity? And we're talking about, this is what, I guess, 1300, something like that, around those times. And so I figured there had to have been ways that electricity was already discovered and harnessed, right? Because, we have an electric charge in our body. There's other things, like they use the lemon. The lemon has a little bit that is there as well. There's other plants and foods that have those electric charges within them. Somebody has had to have done this before. Yeah. And I think just the difference is now in a capitalist society where, you use what you found to try to go out there and mass produce to make more money. Before, I wonder if this was maybe something that the rich and the elite had access to, to a certain level. And so maybe it just didn't grow as fast as it did once it became a part of capitalism. Anyway, that was just my little theory of watching that. But it made me think of the times that I had heard of, these other empires or these other civilizations that had some level of electricity before. And it kind of connected that for me as to how that was possible.
I think that's great because it actually that's why I particularly loved where this myth goes. One, it's cool to see them make the actual pots and the batteries and all that. And the fact that it works is just awesome to watch. To your point, the fact that there was this kind of technology way before what we think of as, the modern age is always that stuff blows my mind. But then the point that they ultimately make about its use in religious practice was really, really interesting to me because that gets to what you were saying about this being within the hands of the elite or within, different groups and how they might use it. And also the fact that, anything that we don't understand oftentimes gets ascribed to God, right? So it's entirely possible that not only did they have this technology, but they didn't understand it was even technology. Right? This could have been a part of something else. Like, who knows how this was actually used in principle. And I thought that is where we haven't really seen them do that on the show before. Normally it's kind of a binary, does this thing work, does it not sort of question. I loved in this one that they went into, okay, what could the uses be? And almost what's the psychology of this? Because it's not powerful enough to run your car. It's not like you can't power a house on it. So what would this actually be used for? I thought that was just it was a kind of a different path for the show that we haven't seen that I thought was great. It was just a very fun, less like very scientific, but less about testing and more about experimentation and, kind of like I said, the psychology of it, which was just super cool.
It made me also think of, going back to what you're saying, like if you don't understand something, you just kind of say it's God. And, how does religion spread in the first place? What if it's a lot more, I guess, a lot more sophisticated than what we realize, where maybe some folks have access to something like this that other people wouldn't necessarily understand. The best scientists or whatever work for you. Yeah. So you have the technology here and you don't want to let it spread out. So, you have something that could shock people on touch. Okay, well, you got to listen to me because God says so. No, God doesn't say so. Oh gosh, that's God. Okay, I'm going to listen to you, whatever you have to say. It made me wonder if that's was also a thing. It's just I've got all kinds of possibilities in my head. I don't want to stray from the topic, but this is kind of what was going on in my head when I was watching it.
Well, I mean, it's a testament to how good the show is that we can have those kind of conversations, right? That you can go off on those tangents from something that's ostensibly a funny documentary kind of show. They do actually make 10 of these kind of ancient batteries, and they work. They produce 4 volts of electricity from these batteries. Again, not a lot. Like that's not gonna do a whole lot, but it's enough to feel it, and it's enough to actually have some practical implications, which they get into. I've talked about this on the show before. I'm terrible at like electrical science and understanding like volts and amps. And like I've tried, I find it interesting. It's not that I'm not engaged, but when I start hearing it, it just becomes gibberish, and like I glaze over. I was gonna ask, are you any better than I am at understanding this stuff?
No, science was my worst topic in school.
Yeah. I'm trying.
I wish it was taught like this though. That's the part.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could, if they made an ancient battery and let us shock our teachers, I would have been in. Can we connect it to the electric fence transformer? So they have 3 different potential uses for the battery. One is electroplating, one is pain relief, and the other, as we talked about, the religious use potentially. To talk about each one of these, electroplating, really cool, using one metal to coat another metal, and you put an electrical charge through it. This was one of those cases where they tee this up, and I was thinking, that's really specific. I don't know why that would be. And then it works.
Yeah.
It just works. They leave it overnight. It works. And they have a theory. I don't know. I assumed that was from their research. They didn't really explain why that specifically, or like, I don't know if electroplating comes from that time period, or there's some reason to believe that that's what it would be. But it, at very low voltage, apparently will just work. And they were able to, I think they had like a coin that they were able to plate in one night. Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was kind of cool. I guess I'd never heard of electroplating, so it made me feel like, okay, I need to go and do some Googles and figure some stuff out. But no, it felt like it was something that was plausible. I'll let you get into the next one. I felt like the next one was like the one that felt like the more, I guess, plausible idea of why this could be used.
Talk about the acupuncture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was interesting that we're talking about potentially the way that this could have been used for pain relief would be through acupuncture, which obviously has been around a really long time. I wasn't super familiar with the idea that you put electricity through the needles. That kind of scares the crap out of me. The notion of having a body full of electrified needles is not my favorite thing to think about.
I think I was imagining like maybe one at a time, but yeah, if you would have had the whole body, that would have been kind of crazy.
They actually go to an acupuncturist who does this on Scotty first with the actual tools that he would use, his needles and his power source, and she's able to feel the twitch. I did think it was nice that when they bust out the ancient battery, the acupuncturist is like, you're going to need to do this on me first. I'm not going to let you do this to her until I know that it's safe, which is kind of nice. It was actually, it was cool to see, because it is kind of a, sometimes I feel like with this show in particular, it's easy to get stuck in they just do crazy stuff all the time and forget that sometimes what they're doing has some danger and isn't completely normal. And so you
could hurt somebody.
Yeah,
maybe.
could potentially hurt somebody. But they end up doing it, and Scotty is able to feel the electricity from the ancient battery, which was amazing. It actually started to burn a little bit, and they had to stop. Like, it works really, really well. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about acupuncture to know if there are actually health benefits from that, if that could have been some form of pain relief back in the day. But yeah, it was fascinating to watch.
It made me think of maybe, if this was like a method for, let's say, the early, athletic folks of that particular time, right? Like, we know that there's been athletic competitions for, centuries, in different forms. And so, or, if you're talking about guys who use their strength for or muscles for like hunting or just whatever things like that were useful to society, there are going to be times where people are going to come back with injuries because it's natural. It's a human body. And so it made me think of like, okay, was this like some early athletic training, type of idea? Like maybe this is something that they thought we figured out there's an electric charge here. Maybe we can use this to help, bring back muscles or, or kind of stimulate you after a while. Or maybe if you're tired and, something is going on, you've had to stay up for a long time or whatever, and you still need to go throughout the day. Maybe this was their idea of maybe an energy boost. So there was just a few things that went through my head as to what the possible usages could be. And, now I feel like I need to do a lot more research to see if there's anything out there to talk about this.
Yeah, I know. It's funny on the show to just see things work, and then you have more questions than answers. We're used to, very much like the gasoline on the beer. I mean, like, nah, it's a ridiculous idea, and here's the science as to why it won't work. But in this case, the science itself works, and the question is why?
Why?
Why would people do this? Did they actually get a benefit from it, or not? Or did they just think they were? And then that can be powerful in its own right.
Yeah.
When they get into the seeing God aspect of this, as we talked about, I thought it was fascinating, but it also leads to a very famous moment on the show that we should talk about. So the idea here is they build an Ark of the Covenant replica that they are then going to power, supposedly with the ancient battery, with the idea being that if you reached out and touched the Ark and you got a zap, that would be the power of God that you're feeling in this machine, or in the Ark. But instead of powering it with the ancient battery, which is not actually powerful enough for them to feel, they said it takes 100 volts to feel a shock. It'll only produce 4. They instead hook it up to an electric fence transformer, which we saw previously on the show. They used it in another myth, actually quite a while ago. And they get Adam in, and they're going to prank him by having him touch this thing connected to the electric fence transformer, which is much, much more powerful, to the point that when Tori tests it on himself, it looks awful. Like, his reaction to getting zapped by this thing is intense, and he immediately says, "This hurts too bad. There's no way we can do this to Adam." But they go through with it anyway and actually zap Adam with the transformer, and he is immediately furious.
Yeah.
And it sort of stops production down. They actually put this in the show that you see them all kind of processing what just happened. This is a really legendary and kind of controversial moment. When I was researching for this episode, I saw some fan posts calling it the cringiest moment in Mythbusters history in watching this happen. How did you feel about it watching this? Obviously, you don't have all the context of the history of these characters, but watching this for the first time, how did you feel about this prank gone wrong?
It felt like one of those moments where, your friends try to mess with you on something and they do too much, and this is where you can cross the line and it now becomes a fight, because I just figured if I'm Adam, somebody's getting swung on, right? Just honestly, it's just that is a little bit too far at that point, especially if you've tested it out and the young lady, I can't remember her name, she tested it out and they all talked about how much it hurt. I think she even said it felt like somebody kicked her chest. And if you know that that's there and that possibility is there, why are we doing it to somebody else when they don't know what's about to happen to them, right? Yeah. It's different if they're like, "Hey, we touched it. This is our sensation. Would you want to try it as well?" And if he consented to it, then fine. Kind of like, when you go through police training, you have to be tased and, all that type of stuff. And it's happening.
Yeah.
That was the part where I was just like, I don't know if I like that. In real life, there might be a fight with me.
Yeah. So the story that has emerged about this moment, and I would love to hopefully we'll have Adam back on the show later, and as well as Andrew Farrell, who worked on this episode, produced this episode. I would love to hear more about the behind the scenes of this moment. The couple of things that I think Adam has talked about over the years that were kind of going on behind the scenes, and he even mentioned this to us the last time he was on the show, was this was still the early days of the show, and there was some idea of that reality TV show kind of producing where you tell one person one thing and you tell somebody else something else and they get in conflict and that makes good TV, right? And they were kind of doing that with him and Jamie at times. They were trying to generate conflict amongst the crew and, create moments to capture. And this was kind of one of those things that I don't know who it was who worked on the show, but apparently somebody outside of the build team and Adam and Jamie thought that this would be a funny moment, something that they needed to kind of create and engender for the show. Part of the problem was Adam has an apparently not super dire or serious, but pre-existing heart condition.
Oh my God.
Which is why
Oh my God.
he has also talked about, they did myths on the show about tasers, and he would never get tased because even though the odds are extremely low that anything would ever happen or anything would go wrong, it's still possible, and you don't want to take the chance. So he mentions on this show, after he gets zapped, he says, I just took this straight through the heart. I noticed that in the episode that he specifically jumps to that very quickly. So it seems like not only did it hurt and did it kind of betray a trust amongst the crew, I think it just scared him. Like, I think it's genuinely seemed like a scary moment that was more than just a prank. It was an issue with how we're setting this whole thing up and with Adam's existing conditions as well. So pretty uncomfortable moment that has gone through Mythbusters history. I'm with you. I don't blame him for being pissed. I would be pissed along the sense of, you know how it is. You work in television. You get close with the crew, and you've got to be able to trust each other. You're gonna see each other at your best and your worst, and you're gonna lean on each other, and that's what it has to be. When somebody in that group defies that trust, it's a whole different thing. It's a personal issue. It's a professional issue. Like, it's more than just a prank at a certain point. Particularly, you and I work on documentaries and TV. We're not putting our necks on the line, right? These guys on a regular basis are putting their bodies on the line. They're doing really dangerous stuff. They have to be able to trust each other on a whole different level. And that seemed to kind of get defiled a little bit in this moment, which is why I think it becomes so intense.
I think that's why this show is different from Jackass. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was more of a Jackass moment. And
that's a good point.
And that's not necessarily what the show is, from what I could view of it from the outside looking in. It's not about, trying to trick somebody into something. And that at some point when you turn around, there's something that's going to happen that you don't realize is going to happen. You're right. These are things where, it's almost like, I have to bring it up again, wrestling, where you have somebody's life in your hand.
Yeah.
And you have to protect them. And so you give each other that trust so that at the end of the day, you guys can walk away unscathed. You get your money and you've done what you got to do. You've done the show and you're good. I didn't realize the heart part with Adam, but that I could see how that could cause maybe some arguments and some discussions after the camera stopped rolling. Like we got to have a serious talk here because that's something that is past my boundaries that I'm not comfortable with.
It's so interesting you said Jackass. That is such a good point because 2 weeks ago when Brockton McKinney, my buddy, was on the show, he had also never seen it. And he said going in, his expectation was it was Jackass. We set up weird stunts and we do it. And then he watched the show and said, oh, it's actually a lot more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
So this is that era, though, right? Of like Jackass and early reality TV. And I feel like there was a divide between, like, I watched Jackass. I loved that show back in the day when I was a kid. Like, I'm not putting it down, but that show was based around stunts, and it was based around the comedy and the absurdity of what these people were willing to do to themselves and do to each other. Yes. And that was one form of reality TV. And the other form was more of documentary like this, like you said, teaching you something, where to bring that kind of Jackass sort of stunt show into Mythbusters also kind of breaks the format, right? We've seen people on Mythbusters accidentally hurt themselves in a funny way. last episode, we had an infamous moment where Tori crashes a bicycle that he's trying to jump over something. And it's hilarious. And it's a very famous moment, kind of, I think it was one of those moments that sort of went viral from the show in early social media days and whatnot. But it was genuine. He wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He was just goofing around and being himself. It wasn't the point. It was just, I'm bored while we're shooting and something funny happens.
Yeah.
To make this part of the format of the show takes away from the point, which is actually the education and the questions and the scientific, discovery and all of that they're trying to get across. So it's so interesting that you said that. I had never thought about. It was almost like Mythbusters was trying to be the anti-Jackass. And a moment like this really breaks that format beyond just the trust and the personal issues. It's also just sort of kind of spitting in the face of the show, which is funny. That's fascinating. What an interesting kind of time in TV that this came out of, and sort of how that, how that was playing out at the time would be really interesting to ask one of the producers about.
And I think that the way that we're seeing it right now is so 2025, because, this is the era of, consent and trying to think of somebody else's feelings and all of that. 2004, there wasn't a lot of that. Like, not to say that it was like such a cruel society or whatever, but you would find more things like that. And I don't think it's just because I've gotten older that people have done that less. But when during that time, I had friends that would do, certain things a little bit more, that you test the boundaries with people a little bit more. And I felt like that was an actual thing. Like, how much can I push the boundaries of somebody? We don't do that now, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've never tried to figure out what are your triggers, what are Cliff's buttons. I've never done that. But, in 2004, who knows? Maybe we would have been trying to do that with each other. So there is a little bit of grace when it comes down to the time period, for sure. And it's weird to talk about 2004 like it was that long ago, but it really was that long ago. It was 20 years ago, man.
I know.
So strange.
And actually, you raise a good point there. Is to be fair, also from the producing side, putting my producer hat on for a minute, I also understand this is the 16th episode of this season out of 20, almost 30 episodes that they produced a season, which is just an insane amount of television to produce. And when you get into the production headspace and everything becomes about what are we getting for the show? Where's the conflict for the show? What's it, we need a moment. And this myth isn't the most visual thing, right? You've got these old jars, basically terracotta pots, and you're getting readings off of them. Like, that's kind of the extent of it. I can understand being like, God, we've got to jazz this up somehow. And in that just rigmarole, coming up with this idea and doing something like this. So definitely not trying to like throw blame on whoever came up with this or say that it was a horrible thing. It's just so interesting, I think, why people, including Adam and including the fans all these years later, have reacted to it that harshly. Is it was such a diversion for the show.
Yeah.
As understandable as it may be of how they got there, it was really kind of a rare, wrong chord for Mythbusters to strike, and just kind of fascinating to think about that with, as you said, the 2025 goggles that we've got on.
Shout outs for you for squeezing in rigmarole in there too. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. I do what I can. I got
a question for you.
Creative writing degree coming in handy for once. Yeah.
A question for you, just from a production standpoint, because I know that like around 2006, 2007-ish, that's when a lot of TV stations or production houses kind of switched to HD cameras. And it was also interesting looking at something in SD, and it makes it look so old, even though it wasn't really that long ago.
I know.
I guess it was, but it doesn't feel like it. It looked like it was from a different era, as well. Is that something that you think about, like, as you're watching things, like, what it's shot on, what's the format, what's the equipment being used for this? Because I found myself thinking about that in the couple of shots that we saw of guys who actually had cameras.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Well, not only do I think about that, and we've talked about it on the show, one of those cameramen was here on the podcast just a few weeks ago, Peter Heath,
Oh, wow.
who you can see in a couple of shots. They've actually started showing the cameramen more on the show,
Okay.
which is fascinating for me because seeing those camera guys is what, as a kid, made me want to make TV. So it's very full circle for me getting to see that. But yeah, absolutely. And Peter, when he was on the show, talked about the cameras that they use and the fact that if you were a camera operator, you had to own your own camera. That wasn't supplied by production. You showed up with your camera and it had to be, of the right format to match what everybody else was doing.
Those are expensive cameras.
Very expensive cameras. At the time, too, and we don't really get this until the last sort of segment of this episode, but high speed was very, very new. High speed photography being something that you could do on video was very new, and we've seen over the course of the show that progress from, in the earliest episodes, the high speed is awful. Like it's just, it's tiny and it's hard to see because you needed a lot of light to shoot high speed and the cameras just weren't there, to where at this point in the show already, when they drop the Cadillac, there's some beautiful high speed photography of that thing getting destroyed. And as the show would go on, they would get faster and faster and more technology. So yeah, Mythbusters is an interesting sort of portal into the way that this kind of content was shot. They pioneered a lot of things, I feel like, for that era, for the kind of Discovery Channel style that you don't necessarily see anymore, because things today would be a lot more, I feel like, not polished in the sense of the show doesn't look professional, but they would just be more slick. It would be, the hosts would not be the ones getting their hands dirty. You'd have a lot more of overproduction, I think, on the actual show. So it's another one of those fascinating elements of Mythbusters that's such a time capsule of this era of TV.
I think one of the reasons why I thought about that is like either looking back at old reality shows that were there at the time, or either wrestling or things I watched, there seems to be, I think also like remember seeing some clips from like a national championship game from 2005 when Carolina beat Illinois. It's like that looks completely different than what happened in 2010. It's like almost like we didn't realize it at the time, but there was a huge jump in what technology was in a really short span.
Yeah.
And I guess because it has progressed since then, but it's been a slower progression. And to see it go back and realize that, oh man, this really jumped really fast in a short amount of time was something that really that I thought about, and something that it's kind of been on my consciousness as of late as well. This might be like in the weeds and a nerd type of thing, but like I think about stuff like this when I watch older shows.
Our audience listens to a podcast by Mythbusters. The nerd stuff is what they're here for.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Found my people.
This myth in particular, though, they ultimately say it's plausible across the board, which is really cool. We haven't seen that so much on the show yet, of just everything being, this works, and they check all the boxes across this myth.
Did that feel like God to you? I don't think so.
If you were able to get any kind of tingle out of touching this thing, that it would have had very, very powerful ramifications. Everything that we can't explain is God. Amazing. To me, it sounds like everything you guys have tested is plausible.
Our third segment on the show, not necessarily a myth, but we get something pretty cool, which is the birth of Buster 2.0. So, Chris, for your kind of contextual knowledge, Buster is the famous crash test dummy from Mythbusters who came in when the show actually got picked up. Adam told us this story if folks want to go back and listen to his interview, but they ended up getting this crash test dummy that they thought they could use for various tests to test, the force on the human body and, all this. They've dropped him, they've blown him up, they've done everything. And at this point in the show, Buster is a mess from everything that they have put him through. And so we get this kind of special, like I said, not really a myth, not so much of a story, but just they're going to rebuild Buster from scratch, from the ground up. For folks who watch the video version of the podcast, whenever we put clips up on Instagram or on YouTube, I have this version of Buster on my microphone. He actually hangs out during every recording. And Harrison and I had been talking about, when do we get to that point of the show? This is a famous moment to see the new Buster. And here it is. Here's where we get him. So really cool to just watch them do their thing and build a crash test dummy from scratch. Like, that's just a thing that they can do in a couple of days, and they just do it and it works and it looks great. Like, pretty amazing to me. You could give me 1,000 years and I'd never be able to do that. So I loved watching this.
The ingenuity in this entire episode was kind of mind-boggling for me. Like, even with the Ark Covenant, like that being built, and it's just like it almost. I mean, it's produced, and we're not seeing the whole process, but it felt like he just kind of pulled it out of his butt, and it was like, all right, here we go, it's here.
It's another.
Like, it would have taken me so long to do that.
It's another one of those ahead of its time things of like the oddly satisfying memes when people will show you power washing or carving something. I was thinking about that when Adam is carving by hand.
Yeah.
He's sculpting the foam that they're going to make the molds out of. And I was just like, I could watch this all day. And in fact, this is, kind of Adam's YouTube channel now tested, is him building crazy stuff from scratch. He's still doing it 20 years later, and it is no less satisfying to watch. It's awesome.
Wow. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. But yes, it always amazes me how anybody freehand, because I can't draw at all.
Same.
So much less, I don't think I could sculpt anything. Freehand, how you could make a piece of foam really look like a human leg, and there he did it. So
Adam and Jamie get into an argument here that I always remember from when growing up watching the show and loving it, that they get in an argument over whether or not they should change Buster's head. And Jamie is saying, we've just done all this work and we're going to keep this burned, scarred edifice on this crash test dummy. And Adam is saying, no, this is the crossover. This is the thing that still makes it Buster. Otherwise, it's a completely different dummy. He's got the head. It's Buster. I want to say for the record, I am on Adam's side. I wanted them to keep the face. And as far as I know, he kept the same face until the end of the show. And I think that face is now in Adam's shop. I think it actually still exists to this day. Where did you stand on this famous argument?
You know what's funny? The argument kind of came out of nowhere for me. Because I was like, oh gosh, they got mad at each other like super quick. It's just like this came out of nowhere for me. That actually is a part that I had to rewind back because at first I wasn't sure what they were arguing about. And then I realized I was like, okay, all right. But no, it's just, keep the same head. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Maybe this was something, like you mentioned earlier, something that they're produced or told to, really argue about. It didn't feel like a big deal. Maybe it was, but it didn't feel like a big deal. But keep the original head. It keeps, that original spirit around.
It felt to me like one of those things of like, if your friend or your partner or whoever, you've been working on something and you've had a million tiny arguments or decisions, like not important, but just we're trying to figure this out and it's frustrating and it's difficult. And then finally you come down to the last thing and you're just like, this is where I plant my flag. I will die on this hill right now. And it's just the
Screw the top on the toothpaste. My God.
Exactly. It's just like the one thing that finally blows it all out of proportion. That's how it felt to me watching it. It was pretty funny to watch. We've seen plenty of Adam and Jamie arguments, but you're right. This was by far the most irrelevant. And they were both just like, well, if you just want to be an idiot. It was so aggressive.
You can tell when somebody's tired of being around the other person for a little bit. So that was a long shoot day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that felt like a long day. The reason they're doing all this ostensibly, I mean, they're building Buster to make him easier to use in the future. He's got wooden bones, so they can see if his bones break, a human bone would have broken as well, and they make him easier to put back together. And they're going to culminate all of this in a test of the new Buster which is awesome. This is not the first time, but one of the few times on the show we've seen them just go, screw it, we're just going to destroy something. There's no myth. There's no reason we're doing this except we can. Yeah. And so they have a Cadillac who we lovingly know as Earl. Earl the Cadillac has been around for a while. They've shot bullets at it. They've done all sorts of stuff to this poor car. And they had made a promise to the car's owner, Cadillac Ben, great name, straight out of a Tarantino movie. I love it. That they were going to destroy the Cadillac when they were done. And it is time to make good on that promise. And they're going to do it by just hoisting it up in the air, putting Buster in it, and dropping it, and completely destroying this Cadillac. And it is purely something Harrison and I talk about on the show all the time, is what made Mythbusters great was the storytelling. You cared about the explosion when they blew something up because you knew what they were trying to test for. Mm-hmm. But I will fully admit that sometimes it's just fun to watch people destroy stuff.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely what this was. They just completely wreck this car. It was awesome.
It was eye candy. And, and I don't think, I don't watch a lot of TV today outside of, sports, wrestling, and documentary. But it doesn't feel like there's a lot of shows like this happening. So you don't get a lot of the, let's just destroy something type of thing. And it made me think kind of what we were saying before. This is so early 2000s.
Yeah.
Like, let's just, we got a big budget. We've got all the money in the world. Let's just destroy something, right? And it's something that's really cool to look at. We don't really see that as much anymore. At least I haven't. Maybe there is. Maybe there are some shows that are like that. But this also felt like a time capsule moment where it's like this was the period where you would see things like that just because you could, and budgets were bigger. You could just go bigger and do bigger and better things, and it was fun. It's just fun. I don't know what it is about it, but it was just fun.
It reminds me of, it was that era of television, but also if you go back a little bit further, you still had this era in movies where part of the thrill was that you were watching somebody do something wild for real, right? Yeah. You go back to movies when there was, less CG and more actual stunt work. Obviously there were risks involved with that, but the brilliance of it was you were seeing things you had never seen before or never imagined you'd see somebody do. It's kind of like now I have a super guilty pleasure for the Mission Impossible movies for the exact same reason. You're actually going to see something that you never would have dreamt you would get to see. I feel like this was the television version of that. And now with YouTube, like if you want to see somebody destroy a car, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. It's not, it wouldn't be like this. It wouldn't, to your point, they wouldn't have the budget. They wouldn't be hoisting this thing up and, dropping it and shooting with high-speed cameras and all this kind of stuff. But still, like now maybe it's a little bit more out there, and that's become the thing. And television is more, I feel like people go to television for more like curated, unreal experiences than they used to. And at this point, it was still just, isn't this amazing that people can do this? Watch what these really clever people can get away with. And that's the other, like added bit of magic to the show that just makes it so much fun.
It's kind of cool because before we were talking about all the scientific parts of it. We're making these historical theories and all that. And it comes back to the very end where sometimes you just want to sit back and just watch the car crash. It's cool to sit and use your brain and think about the deeper things in life. And then sometimes it's cool just to be the guy with the beer in his hand. And, of course, we talked about beer earlier, but just to be like, yeah, that was awesome.
Oh, it never occurred to me. That's why it starts with the beer thing, so that you can have your cold beer to watch the Cadillac drop by the end. You just go all the way through. Yeah. What a journey. You go from beer to ancient, religious symbolism and questions to a Cadillac dropping.
I'm sure there was somebody who got their beer, got it cold, got a paper clip, stuck it in the socket really quick to see what would happen. Maybe turn off the lights in their house for a little bit, come back to the episode, see a car crash, and boy, they had a great 30 minutes.
That is an evening That is quite an evening. Well, thank you guys for listening, for joining us for this episode. And Chris, thank you for joining me on this episode. Tell folks where they can find you online if they want to follow what you're up to.
Absolutely. If you like anything sports, pro wrestling, or, see what me and Cliff may have up our sleeves next, follow me on Twitter and also Instagram at Chris Lea TV. You spell my last name Lea. People ask me all the time, why is it spelled like that? I didn't make the spelling, but also, you don't sip tea, you sip tea. So, hey, it's the same concept. So that's what I always tell people.
That's awesome. Well, we would love to have you back to continue watching Mythbusters if this becomes a new thing for you. Let us know. You're welcome back anytime. We will be back with a new episode next week. The episode is called Son of a Gun. Don't know what that is about, but that'll be a fun one to dive into. Folks can go out, find that wherever you watch your Mythbusters. It's currently on Max, which is becoming HBO Max again. I'm so confused.
Anybody ever stop calling it HBO Max?
No, I kept correcting myself on the show, and now I'm right again. It's very weird. I don't know how I feel about that. But
TNA Impact
yeah, exactly. While you were out there looking for the episode, be sure to drop us a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast. It really, really helps the show. We are dealing with machines, and we have to make them happy, and that is how you do it. But until then, we really appreciate you guys listening, and we will see you next week. Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show was written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us, trythisathomepod@gmail.com.